welcome to Afterthoughts. This is a podcast where we watch something and tell you our thoughts after it. I am your host tonight, Ryan King. We got a kind of an interesting satire, dark humor, question mark to talk about tonight, but let me introduce the rest of my guests. We have John Garcia.
Hey, Ryan. I ran out and I found as many people on the street as possible to pack them in so we can get the right acoustics. So everybody out there listening, do not turn this off. Do not defy me.
Yeah, we didn't record it the first time around. We just sat here and bullshitted.
Yeah, we shouldn't have live broadcasted.
Now we got to record it for real. And also joining us as always, Michael Dixon.
Yeah, I am definitely going to say something on this podcast that our dictatorial overlords do not approve of, so I will probably be hauled away before the end of it. So,
yeah, yes, flush your toilets, get your dogs barking. We're going to talk about some anti-political, anti-Russian topics tonight. We watched The Death of Stalin, 2017, as I kind of said, satirical dark comedy.
I propose we call a doctor.
All the best doctors are dead.
I can't remember who's alive and who isn't.
It's Comrade Stalin.
I'll take it from here.
We need to start putting together a plan.
How can you run and plot at the same time?
We should get Stalin's children here.
What are you doing to my father, you jackals? How old are you?
I'm old.
You're not old! You're not even a person! You're a testicle!
Everything's gonna be fine.
This is not exactly fine, is it? My father's lying there with his head open.
Stalin would have wanted the committee as one.
All those in favor? Carried unanimously.
I want to make a speech at my father's funeral.
No problem.
Technically, yes, but practically.
When I said no problem, what I meant was no problem. Ignore me.
I'm smiling, but I'm very furious.
You're the good guy now? You locked up half the nation.
Yes, and now I'm releasing them. What are you doing?
I've been picking out funeral cushions with Slim Hitler over there.
Takes place just before and mostly after Stalin's death, leader of the Soviet Russian states. This is starring Steve Buscemi, Simon Beale, Jeffrey Tambor, Michael Palin, generally an excellent cast even beyond that. Mm-hmm. That's kind of your main group right there. Essentially, this is after Stalin's death. The people who are in his essentially cabinet, his secretaries or whatever, kind of rushing. You
make yourself laugh.
I made my own puns.
Everybody out there will laugh at that.
you can tell that Ryan is the only dad on this podcast.
Yes. They're trying to take over, but also toe the line in this sort of weird communist regime where you have to be careful what you said, and everybody's afraid of everything. Everybody's afraid of Stalin even after he's dead. And they're all kind of backstabbing, maybe literally. It doesn't sound satirical. It doesn't sound funny in that. But the funniness comes in all those sort of ridiculous situations and conversations that happen within the course of it. I think we'll go around and kind of give our heads up. I'm still wrapping my mind around it. I watched it because I've heard from several people, I think, John, that this is funny.
I liked it.
And that they liked it, and they keep recommending it. And it just popped up on my radar the other day, and I was like, well, people keep saying I should watch it, so let's give it a watch. I enjoyed it. I do think it's funny, but it's also not funny. In the way that, like, to me, this reminded me, if I go for the next closest thing, it's like Doctor Strangelove, I guess, is kind of the next closest thing to this, in that it is a comedy, it is ridiculous, it is pointing out how ridiculous something is. What's a little bit scarier about this movie is even more real than Doctor Strangelove. Doctor Strangelove feels like it could happen, but a lot of this stuff did happen. Maybe not these exact conversations, but this sort of general sentiment. Yeah, great cast.
Yeah.
So, John, what'd you think?
Well, this is my third or fourth time watching this movie. I think fourth time. And I still love it. I still have a great time with it. But the first time I saw it, anytime I see like a dark comedy, I'm so busy processing a lot of what's going on that I don't laugh nearly as much as I do the second time around. And it definitely becomes funnier as it goes, I guess, as you like continue to watch again and again. Just there are different parts that are just so absurd. And I was digging into a lot of the history behind it after this watch just to like see. It's also based on a graphic novel. That's like, it's a French graphic novel. And yeah, to me, kind of the balance comes from, knowing that horror history. It's very interesting. Yeah, you point out Dr. Strangelove, where this has the same level of absurdity, where there are characters that are literally just fighting with each other, being really angry at each other while there's a lot of deaths happening in the background. And it reminds me of George C. Scott talking about like the losses of lives that they would be willing to accept, that kind of thing. Except that this 100%, just like happened. There were a lot of like massacres that are sort of rolled up into this and rendered to fit the narrative. But that did happen if you look into Russian history. And also Stalin, I would say it's one of the most gratifying movies about villainy, like real villains, where you get to see two people that are fucking monsters die in such a vulnerable state. And it's so cathartic to just know that that's exactly how that happened in real life, which is fucking wild. But yeah, I love a lot of the fucking quips in this. Also, Andrea Riseborough is fucking great.
She's great in everything.
She's great in everything.
Yeah.
But in this too, I was like, oh, that's Andrea Riseborough. Oh, okay. And her the guy who plays her brother Vasily just have fantastic dynamics with the rest of the cast. It's just funny to watch them. I beyond that, like there's not much else that I feel like I can say. I really enjoy it. I enjoy the history that's wrapped up in it. The fact that it's able to step back and have these kind of absurdities. One fun, absurd fact is that I think that it's like the General Zuko doesn't have nearly as many medals as he did in real life because they were kind of afraid that it would look unrealistic and too goofy if he did.
That's
so
hilarious.
Just like those bits within the movie, it's funny to hear that kind of toned down. But yeah, I'm excited to have a further discussion about it. So Dixon, kick it over to you.
Cool. Yeah, so I saw this in theaters when it came out and was pretty underwhelmed when I first saw it. Armando Iannucci is a director who's known for political satire. I've heard very good things about In the Loop. I haven't seen it. I don't know if either of you guys have. He was the creator of Veep, and I think Veep is an interesting comparison to The Death of Stalin, where they're both kind of political satire comedies about very incompetent like people who are high up in the political system, and kind of the hilarity that ensues from those situations of people who are just complete empty power hungry whores who have just gotten to the top and don't know what to do once they've gotten there, and don't know how to actually wield their power or perform their jobs in any sort of effective way. And I think that's an interesting idea. Veep, I watched all of it, and I think the best thing about Veep was the insult humor. Like, that was the best part. And it's like, you know, you sit there and watch a 45-minute episode for the 4 jokes that were gonna like just like make you keel over and die laughing on just absurd insults, stringing compound words together that just like don't necessarily make sense, but do in that exact scene, like, for that exact character. And I really liked that kind of aspect of the show. I felt like the incompetent aspect was funny, but a bit weak, and I kept kind of waiting for the insults to come. With The Death of Stalin, I felt like it was that incompetence humor, but the insult humor wasn't there. And I felt like that was, you know, kind of lacking. I was wishing there were kind of some more punches thrown in the movie and some jokes that would land a little harder. There is like very good situational humor where it's like, they're not really making jokes, but the scene going on is a funny circumstance, and it's absurd on its face, and that's why it's funny to see. Watching it this time, I appreciated it a lot more than I did when I first saw it in theaters. And I think a lot of it is because I I'm just a lot more politically engaged now than I was at the time. And it reminded me a lot of both Brazil and 1984, which, have a lot of similar ideas in them. Michael Palin in Brazil and in this, and he was great in both of those movies. I think my favorite thing about the movie was this idea that all of these high-ranking officials in the government are kind of walking on eggshells and tiptoeing around what is the correct party line to say. And we have to, whatever the correct party line is, we're not sure what it is because it changes at the whims of Stalin. But now Stalin is not here, and so we don't really know who's controlling what is okay to say and what is not. And you have the character of Beria, who's kind of trying to take control, but not in an overt way, kind of behind the scenes. But in these interactions with everybody in the committee, all of them are kind of like, well, we don't really know what's okay to say and what's not, and what people are okay to say good things about and what people are okay to not say good things about. And I thought that aspect was fascinating. And that's kind of a core principle of 1984, the book, is that, the party line is always changing and you don't necessarily know what it is, but you're expected to just adopt it and just automatically know what's okay to say and what's not. And that reminds me a lot of, kind of our current discourse in America where, it's like the mainstream line of thinking is kind of always changing. And, it's, is it okay to support war? Is it not okay to support war? Well, it depends on the people that we're killing, or is it like okay to, like this person or not, depending on whatever thing they just did that is in or out of bounds of the things that are okay to do or say. And, it's like, it reminds me of kind of just existing on Twitter and being in that minefield and be like, wait a minute, this opinion was okay last week, but it's not okay this week. Oh shit. All right. I gotta backtrack and apologize and change my shit and make sure that like the hounds don't come after me and get me canceled. And like that environment in Stalinist Russia or post-Stalinist Russia was pretty funny to me. And there's this idea in 1984, the book, where like the highest ranking people in society are actually the people that believe their own bullshit the most, right? And it's like the common people who are like, yeah, whatever, I'm not going to kind of get caught up in this. But the higher ranking people are the ones who get most concerned with, am I saying the right thing? I have to believe and say the things that are appropriate at the time and change my entire belief system when I learn that what's okay to say has now changed, and forget that I ever believed whatever thing previously. And that dynamic playing out in a small group of oligarchs is really funny to see. We're like, shit, I don't know who's going to murder me if I say the wrong thing.
That scene with Malenkov when Jeffrey Tambor comes in and they do their own grieving routine whenever they come into Stalin's corpse that's just laying in a puddle of piss.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh my God, he's irreplaceable. Okay, I have to be strong for the country and I need to step up and take his place. And Beria's like, but you just said he's irreplaceable. And he's like, I know, but I'm temporary. And he's like, I was testing you. Just like, it is like, it's interesting to watch that. It reminds me too of Harakiri. There's that formal system, like an honorific system in place, and a hard, rigid bureaucratic structure of like, now when you say this, we have to do this. And you're watching it devolve into like a primordial bureaucracy where they don't really know the rules and they have to change day to day. And so it's constantly like, well, according to like this article, we have to do this. And so we must, I guess one of you is going to be elected to do these responsibilities. We need somebody to be like the funeral commissioner and there's no precedent for it. So fuck it. Like Khrushchev, you're going to be the funeral commissioner. He's like, oh, fuck. Rooshed or unrooshed. I don't give a shit.
And they all have to vote unanimous on everything, right? It's like you can't dissent. You all have to agree. And so whichever way the winds are blowing, people just raise their hands depending on how that conversation is moving. And it's like everybody is so terrified all the time that they might say the wrong thing.
Yes. I love them holding out the syllables and unanimously. Just waiting for somebody else to
pass unanimously.
Oh, man.
I do think, though, it's interesting because I would say these are the people that don't buy into the bullshit in a way. Like, that's kind of the thing, is they're all scrambling for power, knowing, like, there's a power vacuum. They want to take it over themselves. They don't care about the committee, the voting, the party. right? It's like, what can I do in this situation to take over? But they have to keep the like front
The
in front
facade
of
has
each
to be
other.
there. Yeah.
Yeah. But they all are, because like Beria immediately upon seeing Stalin dead, and that's actually some of the really funny stuff at the beginning is right as Stalin, he's not quite dead, I guess. He's passed out, but they are unable to take him to a doctor until they get the whole committee together to figure out what to do and vote. Meanwhile, each one of them, like you said, is like having their own reaction and realizing like, shit, I got to do this now. I got to do this now, right? Beria runs around and grabs all these papers and like burns them and throws some to his aide out the window to like take and hide, right? Not, oh God, are you alive?
Yeah, none of that.
Stalin, are you okay?
It's like, I love the scene where like, we should find a good doctor, and like, but we sent all the good doctors to fucking Siberia.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
what if we get a bad doctor? Well, Stalin wouldn't like that. What do we do?
Yeah, but if he comes back to life, then it was a good
got a
doctor.
good doctor,
If he stays
yeah.
dead, then it was a bad
That
doctor, and we
much.
can blame him, but he won't be mad at us.
Just like Vasily being like, the Russian plane didn't crash and take out the hockey team. Russian planes do not crash. Like,
Yeah.
none of this happened.
The hockey team is just fine. It's right here in front of you. What are you talking about?
Exactly.
Which and again, like the dark humor there is that happened.
Yes.
Like Vasily was running the team. The plane did crash.
Yep.
All but one of the players died, and he was covering it up from Stalin.
It was like a
from his
year
father,
later, or
afraid to
2
get in
years later,
trouble.
yeah. And like Stalin never knew. Stalin didn't give a shit.
Yeah.
Which, yeah, like looking into how much of this is based in historical fact, there's so many cool threads that kind of come from. Cool might not be the right word, but it's just like nice that they adapted it the way that they did. Like there was a pianist who sent a note to Stalin that said roughly the equivalent thing of like, I pray for your death every day. Really, she just said, I pray to God that he'll forgive you your sins. I go to church and I donated all the money that you gave me, because Stalin gave her 20,000 rubles for her performance because he was so moved, to the point where Stalin read that letter in front of that cabinet and they were like, we should kill her. Stalin was like, no, I can't. Like he actually hesitated to kill her because he loved her performance so much. Which just like, I don't know, that's it's an exemplary thing of like the hypocrisy of, yeah, he just really just makes the rules. Whoever the fuck is in power gets to make those rules. It reminded me a lot of just thinking about Vice as well, and our good old friend Dick Cheney and the unitary executive theory, and how like Stalin seized power in the Soviet Union when he was made general secretary, who he was really just supposed to be glorified secretary who like it was in charge of making decisions on what meetings people would attend, and he could invite certain people, and Trotsky was the competition to him. And so whenever Lenin died, Stalin planned the funeral, showed up to it, sent Trotsky a message that it was going to happen 3 days after it actually happened. And that fucked his whole political appearance and turned everybody against Trotsky. So like he recognized that a bureaucrat has a shit ton of power and just seized on that. And this whole movie exemplifies that fallout of just
Does that mean in Russia the path to power is through being a funeral director?
It might as well.
Because
yeah,
Khrushchev then did Stalin's funeral and then succeeded him.
It continued. Yeah, it's whoever gets the most grandstanding moments. Like even Malenkov trying to get the same girl, the exact same girl that Stalin took a photo with. Like that bickering. Just the greatest example of how the optics of anything influence just, the lowest like voter or the most common person. So yeah, just, I don't know what the fuck we were talking about. The whiskey's already hit me and I'm marking it.
It's already coming back.
I think it's interesting to talk about like the world before Stalin's death and the kind of atmosphere that creates, right? Like the film opens on this radio producer and they are, putting out this concert to the airwaves and apparently not recording it. And I'm not exactly sure how that's possible I'm not sure how radio tech works, but they're like, we put it out on the air, but we didn't record it. And like Stalin calls for some reason and he's like, call me back in 17 minutes. And they're like debating, wait, well, holy shit, was it like at the start of the call or when I hung up the phone or when I told them I would call back in 17 minutes? Or was that a 5 or a 9 on the phone? And the dude, like, despite all of his idiocy, gets it right, calls Stalin back, and he's like, yeah, I really liked the performance tonight. Can you send me a recording? first of all, we never see Stalin listening to the performance. And like, why didn't he tell him that 17 minutes ago when he called? It's just so ridiculous. Like, he's purposely creating these hurdles just to fuck with people.
Yep.
And it's just really funny to see that play out. And anybody who comes in contact with Stalin immediately fears for their life. And they're saying, oh my God, I have to do everything perfect or he's going to kill me.
Yeah, talking about that exact same scenario, so that did happen. That Radio Moscow did put on a live broadcast, and to record, you need to know that you're going to distribute it at least. So they had to have like the vinyl record lined up so they could etch into it. And Stalin heard that, called and said, I want it. And they did panic, and they tried to get, the only difference here is they went through 3 conductors instead of 2.
Yeah.
Because the first conductor was too scared to play. The second conductor was too drunk to play. And the third conductor was asleep.
Just
and
right.
they woke him. Yeah, exactly. The Goldilocks conductor.
Yeah.
He was
What
scared,
did
but
they
he was
say
drunk
when
enough
they-
to not be
that's right.
scared, but not too drunk.
Enough courage.
In the movie, what do they say? They come get him, and you're like, you're the best, closest conductor.
Yeah. It's a musical emergency.
And they do the whole fucking concerto again and record it and like force the people to sit back down and lock the doors and bring in randos off the street to get the acoustics right.
Exactly.
And people who have no interest in hearing this thing at all.
That whole sequence too, where the one conductor's like, even Stalin wouldn't know. Like, he's about to say even Stalin might be able to recognize that it sounds different if we don't have
yeah,
the
different
acoustics
pianist,
right.
yeah.
And they're like, even Stalin, and he's like, oh my god. Like,
of course,
they're
Stalin would
just-
know. He has perfect ears.
I love him talking into like any random object near him that might be bugged. Oh man,
I think what's interesting on the flip side with this movie though is how dark it is, even beyond just this being realistic, right? That there are people that died for these stupid slip ups, for a stupid purpose. But this movie, a lot of people are being shot in the background.
Yep.
Like we see a lot of the violence that just happens to ordinary Soviets for no reason.
Just because
They're
they're
put
on the list.
lists. They're just shot because they're there. They were the maid that walked by the door.
Yep.
Like, just anything will get you shot for any potential reason. And the movie show, like, it is a very violent movie because of that. There's sort of constantly waves of massacring a bunch of people quickly between scenes. Somewhat funny in that it's just like, oh shit, the new thing is happening. Clear out everybody. Then another new thing happens. We'll clear out the people from the last set of people that cleared out that, right? Like, this is just replacing of everybody. And the guys that are being executed in the gulag, they're like, long live
Stalin, and then they get killed.
love Stalin. It's like, Stalin's dead. Oh, long live Molotov or whatever, right? Like, immediately to the next thing. But that, I think that also made me think of Chernobyl and also some of the companies I've worked for.
Oh.
But that's sort of like, we don't want to tell the executive, right? So in Chernobyl, I don't remember who was in power, but the TV show that I watched really, nailed those aspects and all the like actually historical horribleness of what happened immediately after the Chernobyl explosion. But a lot of it was like, oh, well, we can't tell them that it's exploded. We can't tell the European Union. We can't, but you can't tell the Europeans because then we'll look bad.
Yeah, you want to make us look bad?
And so, yeah, we don't want to tell them that radiation cloud is coming their way because we'll look bad versus like, but we could save lives, right? Not important. We can't look bad. We can't tell them that this is why something failed. We can't, and it's like, who can we find to pin all of this onto? Like, who's the scapegoat that we can pin it onto? And the only thing that they have is manpower. So just throw more bodies at everything, shoot more people, like whatever. That's the thing they have in excess.
Yeah. And it's that, the more that I've dug into the history, just following this movie, I feel like it has so many great things to dig into to really learn that portion of. It's horrifying, like how much of Russian history, even World War II shit. Literally, Stalin stepped up to be the strategist in World War II. And he had like the Zap Brannigan approach where he's like, I sent wave after wave of my own men at the Nazis. And like, we got prisoners out of the gulag and made them meat shields. And we gave them he instituted an order. I think it's called Order 422, something like that, where the literal order was, if you take a step back, you get shot. Like when you're on the fucking battlefield. And he was
Take
like,
a step forward,
yeah.
you also get shot.
yeah. So it was
shot.
like, which bullet do you prefer, the Soviets or the Germans? And his generals, I assume this was done delicately, were like, maybe you should not be the strategist. And we could do this because you're very important to the factory industry and like making sure things are going well at home, Stalin. General Secretary, please. You probably better suited and, way more sharp there. And we'll try to figure this out for you. But yeah, like there are so many histories just riddled with Stalin's worst decisions. And one of them also is exemplified in the movie when he drops dead or has his stroke and pisses himself on the ground. And then his soldiers outside, one of them's like, should we go in and investigate? And the other one's like, shouldn't you shut the fuck up? And like, Stalin would do regular exercises where he would be like, "Bleh!" Like out of nowhere, he'd make a sound and see if the soldiers would come in. And if they came in, he would have them killed. So he would actively do trust exercises that fucked him in the end. And it's poetic justice that they just didn't check on him when he had his stroke.
Yeah. It's interesting that people in power are like doing that kind of shit, and then it comes around to bite you. Like Hitler, Hitler similarly notoriously, like whatever pissed him off or whatever his feelings were on something. And when it came to the Normandy invasion, the Germans were lacking tanks because they needed his approval, and he was asleep, and then no one wanted to be the one to wake him up, right? And so tanks didn't show, and then that led to more success on the beaches. So it's like. These things are also the same thing that bring down these regimes over time. Yeah. Because there's so much power on one person's whim, and then things change.
It's a cautionary tale of when the micromanager gets too much power.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the cast themselves and like people coming into it. Like one thing that when I heard that this movie was being made and I saw the trailer of it, and I think that there's been a lot of comments about it too, is that people get really hung up on whether or not somebody looks like a historic figure or acts like a historic figure.
Who gives a shit?
I really don't give a shit about that. I also don't give a shit about accents. I don't give a shit about them doing accents in it.
Nope.
Because this cast just nails everything they need to exemplify how absurd to really drive home that point of the bureaucratic squabble going on. And one actor in particular I love in it, and he's at the center, is Steve Buscemi. Steve Buscemi as Khrushchev, I feel like nails the performance because Khrushchev is historically known as like the clown in the group with Stalin. Stalin kept him around because he was funny. And he would go home and tell his wife about all the jokes he told Stalin, and she would write them down. And
I love that scene where he goes home to his wife and he's like, here are all the things I told Stalin. Here are the things that he laughed at and the things that he didn't laugh at. And she's like helping him strategize for the next day. Okay, well, don't make comments about this anymore because Stalin didn't laugh at it. It's like you might die if you make another bad joke.
Yeah, don't talk about the Navy. He didn't laugh at the Navy.
Yeah.
Jokes. Don't do that. I love that when she's trying to replicate even the onomatopoeias, and she's like, Stalin, or like what is it, Molotov?
Oh, yeah.
Molotov.
Yeah, Molotov.
And he's like, what? Oh, Molotov. Like the deaths cut your throat.
His neck.
That, and I would say also like Simon Beale.
He's great.
And Steve Buscemi.
Yeah.
They just have
as
such
Beria.
as Beria, Simon Beale is so amazing, and he really plays that line of, I think that also one thing that Beria is such a monster in history. He did so many fucking horrible things on Stalin's behalf and then immediately tried to about face to distance himself from Stalin that I feel like Simon just does a phenomenal job having the appearance of tenderness and being like, oh, we're going to go through this progressive reform. And he's able to say all these things with such conviction, like he believes them, but he's a sociopath. Because it'll flip immediately to him mocking one soldier who has a stutter, or him in a cell with a little girl and the implication there of his pedophilia, and like all of that, to he's hugging Andrew Riseborough and being like, courage, little bird, courage. And these inspirational
or when
moments.
He's like, he's sending off the list and he's like, kill him, but kill her first and make sure he can see her.
Kill him, dump his body in the pulpit.
Sadistic shit.
Like the next one's up to you, whatever you want to fucking do.
Yeah, he's terrifying.
Yeah.
Like just an absolute monster, like doing all these evil machinations in the background. And it makes you wonder like how much of Stalin's regime was just him doing all these terrible things. And there's a scene where he's like, we've got new lists when he knows that Stalin's dead or like incapacitated. He puts his own hit lists out and takes Stalin's out. And he's just like, all right, I am going to use the infrastructure that I have created to do, whatever Stalin wanted, to kill whatever people he didn't like. And now I'm going to kill all the people that I don't like. And just immediately, he's the most opportunistic one of the group that sees the opportunity of Stalin potentially dying. He's like, all right, I am going to start turning the cogs of the machine now so that I can control everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're looking at like what Beria is responsible for millions of deaths on his own, and Stalin like hundreds of millions, right? And it's like, what's another name on the list?
Yep.
If you just, and anything, it doesn't even have to be like the murdering. If you're just like, oh, Stalin said it, no one's going to potentially doubt that Stalin didn't say it and follow up on that and then get in trouble if it is. So you could do whatever you wanted if you were in a position of enough power to just push through.
Yeah. And he goes to basically operate as sort of a shadow. He's like, trying to make Georgie into a puppet. Effectively.
Yeah. Everyone's trying to make Georgie into a puppet.
Yeah, Georgie's a puppet. Yeah. Jeffrey Tambor.
George Sr. into a puppet.
Yeah, George Sr. out here is trying to, he's trying to look strong for the people of the Soviet Union by wearing a girdle or whatever the fuck he calls it. It's not a girdle. He says it's like a corrective something.
No, he calls it a girdle. Beria calls it a corset.
That's
and he's
right.
like, no, it's a girdle.
Corset,
I have a back problem. It's functional, not fashion.
Yeah. I love, I know Jeffrey Tambor has some problematic aspects that he's brought into his sort of career and the everything, but he does a great job here as well. He's compelling as a boob, just like a fucking witless second in
he's
command.
doing his Oscar impression, his from Arrested Development. He's his George personality and his Oscar personality, and he's bringing the Oscar to this role. The kind of quiet, reserved person who doesn't really want to make any decisions and probably just wants to go back to his humble trailer and smoke some weed. But he is has to take on the role of Stalin and, just doesn't have any idea what to do or any desire to be there.
One of my favorite interactions they have is that, like, just him being as fucking thick-headed as possible is when Beria threatens all of them. He's like, I have things on all of you. I know everything about all of you. And he's like, no, he said all of you. I was over here. He didn't say anything about me. That distinction.
Yeah,
all of you can kiss my Russian ass. Like, leaves the little girl.
Yeah. The part where they're all giving their speeches at the funeral.
Oh, yeah.
And his is like, and isn't a pause part of the revolution? I think it is. Just the perfect awkwardness, almost like they're all giving their 7th grade book report of a book they read. Like they're all trying to kind of fill it with words that sound
profound.
Right. Yeah. And Beria, when he comes up to the podium, he's shorter than the rest of them, so he's like, you kind of can't even see him.
Yeah. and fucking Vasily, which I would say that the core cast really it is Beria, Malenkov, and Khrushchev that we focus on for most of it,
with a little bit of Molotov cocktail thrown in there.
Yeah, he's in there for good measure. And his
love
dedication
Michael
to the
Palin.
state.
He's great.
Oh my goodness.
I love. He doesn't even he is so loyal to Stalin that Beria gets his wife out of prison. He's like, Stalin put her in prison as a political prisoner, and I got her out for you. Here's your wife back. And he's like, but she committed atrocities. She's a horrible person. She needs to go back to prison. What are you talking about? And he's like, no, she's fine now. And him and
they
Khrushchev,
were false accusations.
Yeah, him and Khrushchev have to be like, oh, this is the party line now that she's okay. Okay. They realize that Beria is starting to threaten them if they're not okay with that. But Michael Palin still, every chance he gets, talks about the guilt of his wife and the how sorry she is for what she's done, and clearly does not want any part of her at all. Does not want to spend another second with her.
Yeah, that and him. Oh, the other when they're doing the unanimous voting, and he does that bit where he's pondering back and forth about what the real party line might be,
what Stalin would have done. Yeah,
and everybody is slowly raising and lowering their hands
up,
until
hand
they
down,
can
hand up.
But yeah, I think that it's when I was watching the movie this time around, I kept thinking like, what is it about it? Because that joke is played out throughout the entire film, and it's done in a way that feels fresh every time. Like you're encountering new experiences with the hypocrisy of an ever shifting bureaucracy that is built that way to keep people subjugated and in fear. But it's the funniest joke every time that I see it. It's just so funny. And I'm really trying to peel back the layers of like what makes it good here and when would it feel played out elsewhere? Like when does the joke really run dry? Because it's woven all throughout of this movie is everybody constantly tugging on that line and the movie nudging you and being like, hey, they can't really admit to each other that it's bullshit. Isn't that kind of funny? But it never feels stale. It's weird.
I think too, the way the bullshit plays into their reactions or their interactions with each other, and how terrified each of them is of the other people in the committee is hilarious. And I love that scene where they're at the like viewing of the body and they're standing in like a weird half circle around something, I'm not sure, and Khrushchev is like, who the fuck invited the priests,
bishops,
bishops, and he's like, Malenkov, did you do this? He's like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. And he's like, ask Barry if he did. He's like, no, you fucking ask him. And he's like, well, I'm further away. You ask. And they're like standing ceremonially in a half circle, and he can't like get around to Barry. And so there's this weird like telephone game that plays around. And Khrushchev's like, just all right, switch places with me. I'll ask Barry. Like, get out of the way. He's like, we'll make it look like it's part of the ceremony. And he starts doing this weird ceremonial kind of dancing thing to get in front of Malenkov, and Jeffrey Tambor's like, what the fuck are you doing? Get back in your place.
Slowly moves back.
And he kind of dances back in.
It reminded me of this movie. I feel like captures a more intimate view of what I do when I watch any political theater. When I'm watching, like, if you see anything on C-SPAN or you're watching even something as fucking stupid as like a royal wedding. You're like, what the fuck are they talking about? And it's probably this stupid shit here where they're just like waving and smiling. It's like when the news
Who invited that asshole?
Yeah. It's like when the news ends in like Anchorman and they're rolling credits and he's like, you're a dirty whore. Like nobody can see what they say and they're smiling. And you're like, oh my God.
I do think it's interesting in this movie, right? Because we get a little bit at the beginning before Stalin's passed where they are all kind of joking at the dinner.
Yeah.
And I think it is sort of this like layer that's, peeled back. That's like, oh, behind the doors of this horrible shit, these people are just like laughing and cutting the shit. And right. And there is certainly that amount of like, even though communism was supposed to be about sharing everything and creating a better thing for everyone, it like absolutely it became this oligarchy where they're having the great dinner and laughing it up. But then it's like, even after Stalin's death, though, when they're behind closed doors, they're still playing the game.
Yeah.
I think is what's with this movie is that really interesting, like, and every once in a while, like, cracks, right? Someone will, like, crack something a little bit. And it's, I'm forgetting what his name is, but when Steve Buscemi's character is talking to the general. Yeah, Khrushchev, I would say the general. I don't remember his.
Oh, gotcha.
Zhukov.
Yeah, and then after he's like, okay, here's what we're gonna do, and Zhukov is like, oh, I would have to turn you in for saying something like that, and then he starts smiling and he's like, I got you, right? Like there is a little bit where they crack and show that it's the bullshit.
Yeah.
It's like you thought the army wouldn't be in for a coup. I was just fucking with you.
I've just been waiting.
I have to report you for threatening to harm somebody, a member of the. You should see the look on your fucking face.
Exactly.
I constantly think of General Zhukov when I'm at work because there's that like, gentlemen, why has the army outpost been replaced by the NKVD? I'm smiling, but I'm very fucking furious. It's just like a great line. Oh man, Jason Isaacs is fantastic as General Zhukov.
He's great. Yeah,
so good.
Khrushchev too, I think is an interesting character where like Buscemi plays that role where it's like he's almost the straight man in this scenario. Like he's trying to be kind of this funny character to get adoration from Stalin, but he is kind of the practical one at the end of the day, and he is kind of the audience's view into how crazy everything is around him. But like he knows what he's supposed to do to be a part of it, but he also knows that it's bullshit, and he seems more willing to admit that than anyone else is. So in his conversations with people he feels like he can trust, he is letting the audience in on, hey, we all know this is stupid, and we have to like figure out how to kind of cut our way through this.
Yeah, and he even misnavigates like different political theater that he's supposed to be showing for people. Like you have a great example with Beria and Svetlana, Andrew Riseborough's character, where Beria is like, courage, little bird, courage, and like really trying to be a fatherly figure to her. And there's a sweet moment between them, even though Beria's a monster, that like taken out of context, you're like, this is oddly sweet, even though it's about a man Beria sent to his death and can't bring back. But then you have the juxtaposed with Khrushchev talking with Svetlana, where he's like, just know, even after your dad passed, no harm will come to you. And she's like, why would harm come to me? Why would that be a thing that you talk about? And then he doesn't know how to navigate that. So he's like, no, if anybody tries to you, then and he just takes the word out instead of trying to change the messaging. But yeah, like that, and he doesn't know how to navigate talking about Vasily and handling those situations. And Khrushchev just at every turn isn't as competent at navigating the bureaucratic mechanisms as Beria is. And yet he ultimately outmaneuvers Beria because Beria makes too many sweeping changes and introduces too much change. And
he's kind of so operatically full of shit that everyone is so aware of it, where it's like Khrushchev is like, he's not as good at going through the motions and making sure that people see that he's on their side, but he can just get you in a conversation, be like, dude, this is stupid, and you know it is, and I know it is, and we got to fucking deal with this. And Beria can't really like level with people in a real way that Khrushchev could.
Yeah.
And anyway, Beria has a big target on his back, right? Because he's like, he constantly pokes at everyone and tells them that he has something on them or shows them he has something on them. So they all know Beria could fuck them over. And then some of them could fuck over each other, but Beria has so much potential to fuck everyone over that they all want him out there.
Yeah. Yep.
And Khrushchev was a reformer to an extent. I mean, still, didn't get to the complete, wasn't a great guy himself either. But in it, he talks about like, oh, he wants to release the prisoners and scale back on some of these things, which then immediately the others try to use against him by doing it themselves first. Meaning they all know like, this is a little bit too much. We need to get a little bit better, which I think is part of why they work with him, because they also, they agree. They're like, it's a little bit bullshit. We need to do something.
I learned that after Khrushchev, basically after they killed Beria, which took months, the movie, it takes like a day. They do it same day. They like show up and they grab him. And then they just go and
take him out to a barn.
Yeah, take him to a barn and they read him his quick rights, and then they fucking shoot him in the head. And that's got that done. And like, it took a few months for Beria to die, and then after that, Khrushchev kind of rallied the committee to be with him, and then he got himself into a position of power and demoted everybody else so that he could be the actual leader of the Soviet Union. And only after that did he have this speech. There's a speech called, I think it's like the Great Silent Speech or something, the Quiet Speech, something like that. Secret Speech, something, where he just comes out and basically in front of everybody in Russia admits that Stalin's a horrible person and talks about all the crimes Stalin committed. And even after doing that, the country has so many brainwashed people that to this day, when the Death of Stalin movie came out, 2 Russian journalists got into a fist fight on a podcast.
Oh my God.
Because they disputed like World War II facts about what Stalin did or didn't do. And that was like used by the state to justify banning the Death of Stalin in Russia.
Wow.
They were like, if those two, I think that like their secretary, whichever fucking secretary decided to do it, was just like, if these 2 dinosaurs fought over this, then who knows what else the country would do if they saw this movie. Which one cinema was bold enough? I think it was Cinema Moscow, bold enough to show the movie, and then raided by police for unrelated reasons. Totally unrelated reasons.
Okay, sure.
So, that's usually how it goes.
Yeah, so much like back and forth in Russia, even now, even long before that. I remember I was playing Trivial Pursuit as a kid. And, everyone, when we were kids, the globes constantly changed. Fucking countries went in and out. Like, there's no point in buying a globe.
Czechoslovakia.
But similarly, we pulled out the, like, Trivial Pursuit card, and it's like, what is St. Petersburg called now? And it's like, well, the answer is St. Petersburg, but it's like, it changed names between the printing and then changed names again by the time I got the card to play it.
Games
right?
that
And that's
print
like,
out shit like board games and card games, like you should never use the word now. It's like you say, what was St. Petersburg called in the year of our Lord blank?
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
But at least put parentheses in a year for now. Jeez.
Yeah. But yeah, that like naming the cities and putting up the statues and then tearing down the statues and putting up the new statues and like, right, out with the old and with the new, kind of constantly rewriting the history.
Yeah, it's actually kind of amazing. So I'm kind of taking us off topic a bit, but still in Russian politics and sort of because we have that scene where they talk about our fun scene where it's like, who the fuck invited the bishops? Because like when they solidified under communism, there was like this massive ban on religious practice and like how visible the churches will be. Yeah, the church was a threat. Even that purge they talk about where all the good doctors are wiped out, that was like Stalin's purge against Jewish doctors specifically, where he would either revoke their licenses and then send them to death camps that he was trying to, prop up at the same time. So there's just this constant, like, we need to eliminate any and all religion from the communist states, the Soviet Union. And
I feel
now
like we just did a movie about this.
Yeah, it's really weird that they're trying to make it a swamp where no religion can grow. Yeah. But it's interesting to think about that now in the context of the current Russian government, where they, instead of like rejecting religion and trying to ban it, they embrace it as an extension of power and what you can utilize. It's a utensil. And there's a movie that we have not watched on this podcast that I know I've talked about called Leviathan that has heavy ties to like what the Putin administration does and how the church is involved and complicit in a lot of propagating that message. And it's fascinating to think that it completely flipped as a country from being like, yeah, we're godless communists who are godless for the reason of absolute power to we're godful now, and
for the reason of
absolute power,
Yeah.
and that it seems like religion doesn't really, it can be used either way, I guess. But
hey, if the church is good for anything, it's for justifying war crimes. Okay, that is the most effective thing that religion has ever done in the history of mankind.
What are you
justify
talking
war
about?
crimes.
Those popes talk directly to God. That's why one of them exhumed the other and put him on trial before the maker himself.
Right.
Exactly.
And why they had multiple popes and anti-popes.
Anti-pope.
You have like Henry creating his own church and putting himself at the top, so he didn't have to like contend with rules from the Pope, right? Like you can either use it and put yourself at the top, or you butt heads with a Pope or whatever, and is not going to work.
Yeah. Let's also talk about the one time that American technology surfaces in this movie. Which
It was an MRI machine or something.
Yeah, some like I don't remember what it was. Something to help like preserve Stalin's corpse when they're like cutting open his brain and peeling back the skin.
That scene was wild. Like, why the fuck are they doing this? Why are they cutting his head
They're all
open?
just standing around doing it.
Yeah, so casually.
Vasily comes in and is like, "Get away from me, you jackals!" Injecting poison into his brain. Like, that's just a great scene with Vasily, and like any scene with Vasily is great. He's a drunken like mess, which Stalin's son famously was, like the big fuck up. And it's,
in a long tradition of big fuck up sons of dictators.
Why not? How close to George Michael would you say, Vasily, in like some, I feel like George Michael's more competent.
No, George Michael is not a drunk. He's just
not at all.
Weird loner.
He's a
idiot.
weird loner kid. Yeah, I was just curious in terms of
Vasily is like part of the long line of, like now we have Donald Trump Jr. and Hunter Biden and all these fuck ups that like they.
I just wanted to keep the Arrested Development narrative going.
No, he was more like a Job Job.
I could see a big,
not a George Michael. He's more like a Job.
Definitely
character.
a Job. Illusions.
George Senior is like the Stalin, and Job is the Vasily.
Yeah, it's like a drunk Job.
You're right.
Yeah.
I misspoke. I jumped
Like
the
George
lineage
Michael.
line.
That's I know. George Michael is. I don't know that he's ever had alcohol.
I could definitely see Vasily as a Job. If he was a magician, it would make all the sense in the world. Him and his illusions.
My illusion, Michael. Trick is something a whore does for money.
Yeah, I could see him like accidentally spilling 1,000 quarters out on a table when he's trying to do something else.
Yeah.
Why should you elect me to the board? For the same reason this $100 bill is nothing more than 100 pennies. Yeah. All right, well, you've already lost the $99.
That scene when Vasily runs into after he's burst into that sequence with the American machine, and he's like, "You're putting this is treason. You're putting toxic foreign like utensils into my father's body." The other scene where he bursts into like the foreign embassy sort of meetup that they have, and he's just like, "These are all wretched like demons. They're sucking the cocks of like foreign governments and whatever." And that one translator who earnestly is trying to gesture sucking the cock. Just
Barry's like, don't
balls.
translate that.
Yeah, don't do that. Don't do that. Oh my God.
And then his speech that he writes like demands to be part of his father's funeral. He's like, I have to give a speech at my father's funeral. And then he just like goes on some random rant. What was it, about animals or something?
He's like,
well, yeah, he starts being like,
was a
we're
great
all,
bear, we're all
we're
his
not
cubs.
lab rats.
And he starts listing all of the Soviet states.
of the
Russian
Soviet
cubs,
states.
Moldovan cubs, Ukrainian cubs. Yeah, it just goes on.
And they purposely time the flyover to drown out his speech because they know it's going to be shit. Yeah, I do like that part too with the Jeffrey Tambor's character where he's like, he wants to give the speech and he's like, no problem. And then they start saying like, no, this isn't going to be good. And he's like, no, I meant no, comma, problem.
No, money down.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh man. Maybe we should discuss the pivotal scene. I feel like we're going to go through all the fun things that we liked. We're very much on the risk of like, that scene was awesome and that scene too was fun.
Oh yeah. That's like the hole that you fall in when you're critiquing a comedy. It's like, you remember when this happened?
Yeah.
That was fucking
Yeah,
funny,
you turn
wasn't
into
it?
Chris Farley in SNL. Remember when? Yeah, that one sequence. So the end, the climactic finale of the coup essentially happening, because for a while it very much is that that invisible dance around the different bureaucratic wordings and what the party line is, and that's funny. And then when it really starts to lock into the coup, that, I don't know about y'all, but I don't really laugh during any part of that scene because it's so fucking frantic and there's so much happening and it's so intense.
Yeah.
I was just curious, Ryan, like watching that, because Dixon and I already seen it. Like, what was going through your mind when you were seeing the coup in effect?
Yeah, I think the only things that are potentially funny there is still the like where Khrushchev is still trying to convince people, and it's like, yeah, he's on board. Yeah, he's on board, even though he's not, right? And
Malakov's
like,
going to be tricky.
them,
No, you got to get all of them on board.
Right, yeah. So it just essentially tells some of them that the others are on board, whether they are or not. And then, just like ends up in a position where Malakov, whatever his name is, has to sign the thing anyway, because it's like, oh, it's too far gone. Like, I just have to sign it and we have to move forward. Yeah, and it does get kind of crazy from like, essentially when they go in there, he pulls the shit on Beria, they bring in the military, and then they take him to shoot him, and it is very quick and done. I think it's more somewhat cathartic because of all, like you were saying, all the like shit that had been happening, all the shit that we constantly see Beria doing, and the people being shot in the background. This is like not too long after they like clear out Stalin's house and like literally everyone, and they're just shooting.
Yep.
Right, the guards that were there, like all that stuff.
The like
constantly
gardeners
in the
and cooks and janitors and stuff. Like,
and
just
this
killing everyone for no apparent reason.
After like Beria has also there's that one Slimin, I don't remember what it's Slimanov.
Yeah.
After that guard Slimanov, who informed him of Stalin's condition, and then like subsequently got arrested and
like,
detained. Yeah, and he's
here,
going to be like executed or something, but he's just like mocking him the whole time. it's like shortly after that, then this sequence happens.
And so, yeah, I think the speed at which it happens and kind of where it's happening is somewhat cathartic. It is really like fast.
Yeah.
From like they have him, they're out there, they're reading the whole speech of all of the things that he's being convicted of.
Yep.
And then the way that he gets shot, where it's like I think they're like taking him
barely
out
the door.
Yeah, maybe line him up or something, and one of them just shoots him right there, like real fast, and it's like, yeah, it's done. Come on, let's go.
Yeah.
It's like again a dark humor, and somewhat a release, and then that's pretty much it, right? Like that.
I like the line of Malenkov is like trying
end.
to stop it. And he's like, he deserves a fair trial. And Khrushchev's like, yeah, we're giving him one right now.
Yeah, here it is.
This kangaroo court is happening right the fuck now. I'm going to read off all the crimes he committed, and then we're going to shoot him in the head.
Then we'll just shoot him. Which, yeah, John, you were saying like it took longer. Like in real life, they had to like sneak him out in a car and take him to some other bunker. And he did have a quote trial, and that there was a judge, but there was no
appeal system.
Like it was a kangaroo court, right? They just read.
Himself.
Yeah, so it's like, and they killed him that same day after he was convicted. Yep. So it's similar. Like they just, in a movie timeline, you just get it done quicker doing it this way, and it is a little more, somewhat more shocking, I guess.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think at that point I was already like kind of on board with the movie, and it balanced the like violence and the comedy of it.
I think it just like, for me, it's so intense because it speaks to my primal fear of pioneer justice. Where like I don't so much care about Beria as a character, because as like a human being, he's a fucking monster, and so it was cathartic to see that all happen. But the rate within which humans can just be like, we all just need a consensus to fucking murder somebody. Let's do it. All right, justified. Get him through.
Vigilante justice, baby.
There we go. Yeah, like that's always been, that's one of like my prime phobias for some reason, is just like that at some point I have nightmares about it where somebody accuses me of small shit, and for some reason I get fucking railroaded through a system. It's so strange.
Ryan, don't say anything about the plot that we've had to remove John from the podcast.
What?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah. Goodbye forever. I think it is interesting to put it against the fact that like Beria could just write someone's name down or just say something, or they just automatically are like, oh, you happen to be in this building that we're clearing out, and so they just shoot everybody. Yeah. To where it is so trivial and there's no question about it when the government is killing people that aren't important. But Beria has enough importance that they have to come up with enough reason to kill him.
Yeah.
But I also feel like if they just shot him and then afterwards said, something happened, like everyone would have to believe that too. So it's kind of weird that they
even try.
Put on enough of a front.
Yeah. It is. That's the paradox of such a situation.
Again, it's like they convict him for his crimes, but they're crimes he did for Stalin, where Stalin's crimes, like you kind of, again, it gets into the same loop. The moment you start
peeling it back, it doesn't really makes sense, but it doesn't make sense. But it's just like, hey, fuck it. Past a certain point, we just agree, and there we go. Yeah, and at that point too, you see that's the only time that I feel like you see the real flip for Khrushchev, because for the most part, like he shows up to Stalin being in a puddle of his own piss in his pajamas, and
with his suit pants on over his
still
pajamas.
got fucking a tomato in his pocket from like the previous day, and he does all the shit at the funeral where Malenkov's like, the fuck are you doing? And like all this shit that's just kind of boobery on his part, trying to navigate the political system. And the moment that Barry is dead, he's like, I'm going to fucking bury you. And it becomes really intense, just the energy from him. And he goes up to Svetlana and gives her a letter, and he's like, you're going to go away. You're going to go fucking live in another country entirely. And we're going to look after Vasily because we can't have him out here being a fucking embarrassment. And it just shifts gears entirely to this leadership role. And that ending sequence too, where they show the same concerto being played, and it's that bookend, and you just see him enjoying it. And they put the text up on screen about him assuming power and demoting everybody else. And then the camera slowly pans up to his successor behind him, who's like plotting and waiting. And like that point, the movie I feel like it wraps up in a nice bow. It's not funny anymore. It just is how it's going to end.
Well, and the outro, they are going through pictures with people kind of being deleted out of each of the pictures, right? Is like the history is being written now by the winners, I guess. Right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, let's say this. We can kind of wrap it up. You mentioned earlier, I do think it was a good decision to just have people just speak the way they are, especially with this trying to be like a fast dialogue comedy, to not try to balance that or have people think. And then there's some improvisation here as well, which, you know, being able to just talk normally and candidly helps with that. And I don't think it's distracting that some of them have a British accent or an American accent or whatever. Like it does work. It just sort of, you get over it pretty quickly.
I think also they got actors that are really good at, you know, improvising and being the characters that they created. But like, I don't know that Jeffrey Tambor could do a convincing Russian accent. I don't know that Steve Buscemi could do a convincing Russian accent. But like, it doesn't fucking matter, right? Like the movie is in English anyway. Just fucking have them talk normally, you know, like you're beyond the point of belief at that point where you have a bunch of Americans and Brits playing these roles. Just have them speak normally.
Yeah, I saw a really valid and neat point, which I don't know if it's an intentional thing by casting, but that the variance of different accents and the fact that Stalin also had a Cockney accent.
What? Oh, he did.
Yeah,
oh,
he had a Cockney
Yeah,
accent.
he does. Yeah.
And like that variance in English accents was very representative still of what would have been the Russian accents needed. Stalin had a very Georgian accent, and there were like everybody kind of came from different states in the Soviet Union because it's so big. They would just have different sort of ways of talking that it balances out. And I was like, cool. Don't think that anybody was thinking that in casting. I think that it was way more about, you know, the actual performance and what the person brought. But that is an additional valid point to make. Really neat.
That's interesting. That is something that gets missed with things going through a translation. I'm thinking of John, the Phoenix Wright games that are they're in that weird spot where they're translated to try to kind of not be exactly Japanese, so they kind of pretend that they're in some maybe America but not. But they give one of the characters like a Southern American accent,
and stereotypes that they kind of
to kind of represent that she and the accent she has is sort of a country bumpkin-esque accent for Japanese.
I've always
and so that's one way you kind of see it done, to use an accent that way, even though it's, you know, dubbed.
I've always been fascinated by that. I think that like we because it is not a native language to us or not an understood language, when you watch any foreign film too, like you can't pick up on different dialects, and it's always fascinating to watch it with somebody who is a native speaker or has a good grasp on the language, to hear them be like, where is that from? Is that from like the southern part of this? Whereas, you know, I've been told myself that I have a New York style of talking, which I don't fucking know. I've been told by New Yorkers.
The man from Lockhart, Texas.
From Lockhart, Texas is I've been told by like people from New York, like I'm either from New York or from New Jersey, just the way that I talk, and I'm like, I don't fucking know what you're talking about.
That's weird.
That's so strange, but it is one of those like, okay, cool. Guess if I wanted to go to Hollywood, I could get a job as a New Yorker.
Forget about it.
Hey. I don't think your friends respect you. Anyways, Ryan, you're the host here. Should we take us out?
I was trying to wrap it up, but we got sidetracked again.
The alternate name for this podcast is Sidetracked.
We got sidetracked.
That's the spinoff.
So let's go around and give our opinions. I did watch this with Darla. She had to ruminate on it for a bit, and then today said she gives it a C.
Okay.
But she did not like Doctor Strangelove either, and so kind of from a recommending standpoint, I'm like, if you love that, if you love that, you'll love this. But if you like satire stuff is either hard to stomach in general, or particularly satire around that political theater, violence, you know, then this all will fall in that gap. I think she was like, I was too distracted by all the like murder in the background to be able to take in the humor, and then the humor's not funny because of its realism, but that's what makes it funny in satire, right? So it's that balance. I think as a satire, this balances it perfectly. Like this is, you know, and which Doctor Strangelove does too, right? Of like, it pushes it enough to the absurd, but not to where it's still not realistic. Like just that right level where it's like absurd, but you kind of keep coming back and forth below and above that line of absurdity. And so, yeah, I think this is a great way. Great cast. Steve Buscemi in a starring role, not something you always see, but you always love him. And I think this is great. He definitely carried it and did a great job.
He didn't die.
The rest of
Yeah.
He almost always dies in
surprisingly
every
didn't
movie
die.
he's in.
He's the Sean Bean of Steve Buscemi's.
So yeah, I recommend it. I did really enjoy it. I think most people could enjoy this. And I do think that it's not historically accurate, right? Like, and I don't think that it tries to pretend that it is, but has enough in it that is true or similar to some stories to give you an impression of what did happen.
I think it's trying to be like, accurate in its vibes, right? Of like the atmosphere
it's an approximation
that was there in the Death of Stalin and the fear that these people had and the absurdity of the situation. It's trying to give that vibe of what it might have been like to be there.
Yeah.
John, what's your final verdict?
Well, I've seen it 4 times
on this watching.
So, I mean, I obviously kind of coming into it, I've seen it before and I was fine watching it again. I recommend it. I think that it's one of those things where I'm fascinated. I've talked about it before, either on this podcast or on the old No Tut set, that my guilty pleasure is biopics, but I think my guilty pleasure really is just any historical pick that has a particular vision, whether it's done poorly or done really well. I like just watching the interpretation of and rendering of like an event in history, a pivotal moment for a government or even fucking corporations, which those end up being hilarious because they're fucking terrible. This one is horrifying and hilarious at the same time. And when I saw it in theaters, I took friends to see it. I took my dad to see it. Part of it was, even if he didn't get the satire, which he did, he understood and thought a lot of it was funny. I still was like, a lot of the boomer crowd being raised on the rah rah America stuff would see this movie and enjoy it too. Just because there's that like, oh, is that really what happened? Or like, that's insane if that actually happened. And I think that it really points to, again, a lot of cool threads of history that you can dig into. I wouldn't say, again, I keep using the word cool, but really what I mean is it has a lot of buried history in it that makes you interested in learning more about what really happened. And that's a benefit of a good satire as well, is you can tell that it's biting, and at the same time, you're not entirely sure if everything that it's doing is real. And then when you find out it is, it makes it even funnier. And so I feel like that just adds so many layers to it that I enjoy. So yeah, would recommend. Dixon?
Yeah, Dixon, after the second viewing?
Yeah, so I definitely enjoyed this a lot more on this watch than I did on the first watch. The first time I watched it, I didn't like it. I definitely enjoyed it on the second watch. And I think, again, that's just me understanding politics and history more than I did the first time that I saw it. I think it's like I saw an interview with Bruno Dumont somewhat recently about Robert Bresson films, and Bruno Dumont's a French filmmaker, and he said like having watched a Bresson film is better than the experience of watching it. And I don't necessarily agree with that about Bresson. I really like watching Bresson films, but I get what he's trying to say. That's kind of how I feel about The Death of Stalin, where like I think all the situational stuff is really absurd and funny when you're thinking back on it. Like, that was actually like the concept of that is pretty funny. I didn't laugh a lot while watching the movie. I really appreciated what it was doing. While watching the movie, I was just wanting more jokes. And I think that is, Ryan, you talk about Dr. Strangelove. I think Strangelove is one of the best movies that's ever been made, and also one of the funniest movies that's ever been made. And it's just like, it's just joke after joke, right? There are so much amazing dialogue, so many hilarious jokes that work really well. And it's creating absurdist situational humor, but it's also throwing in jokes as well. I feel like I get in this argument with people about like Seinfeld versus Arrested Development, and I'm like, Seinfeld is just pointing at a weird thing in society and saying, hey, aren't we smart for having noticed this? And Arrested Development is doing that, but also making jokes about it. And I'm like, I just want to hear jokes at the same time, right? And like, so like I like The Death of Stalin. I think it's a fascinating movie on the concepts that it is discussing around the idea of like free speech and what is acceptable to say in society, and power grappling and a weird fucking regime and all these things are really interesting. And thinking back on it, it's a fun experience. I have more fun talking about it than I did watching it. I would recommend it. I think it's a good movie, but I wish there was a little bit more of an effort to, kind of make jokes during the movie to make it a little bit more of a palatable experience while watching it. I still think it's fun to watch. It's entertaining. I wish it was a little bit kind of punchier in what it was doing.
Mm-hmm. I can see that.
I think it's an interesting movie and how it has to toe the line between the comedy, the reality, the violence, right? The kind of absurdity of it. I think when you have something like Dr. Strangelove where you're just making it up, right? Or Catch-22, it's sort of built around that, the war, but a lot of it is just you get at the situations, you get to make it up. But like you said, Brazil, this is a lot like Brazil, but in Brazil, again, you just get to be as wild as you want.
Yeah, Brazil gets
but it
to
is
like just make it so weird that it's more entertaining, but yeah.
Yep.
Right. I tried making a card game back in 2015, and I called it Undefensible.
Okay.
Because I figured I could copyright that. But the whole premise of the game was that you were like a talking head, a political talking head for your party, and you get thrown on the news, right? You're just like called up. You're one of the little heads on the news.
You're the press secretary.
And they ask you...
has to answer for Israel's war crimes.
Right. Well, and what it is they ask you the question, and at the same time, you're finding out the party just changed its stance to something completely ridiculous, but you have to back it now, like on the spot.
Oh, man.
And the way the game would play is a bit like Cards Against Humanity, where you have the shit in your hand that's like your party's, potential positions, and then something comes out on the table that is a normal situation, but the shit you have in your hand is always bizarre. And each person has to like put down their thing and then fight for the defense of why cars should be allowed to marry gorillas. Like, that's the new party line.
That's amazing.
And as I was working on it, now this was like 2015.
Ryan,
so
I would buy
early
the shit out of this card game. So
it got too real. Like, I think that was the part where, as I was developing it, I just kept coming up against this, like, this is too realistic. This is getting, like, even putting absurd things in there, it's just like, this could happen at any moment, and the party would just be like, okay. And I'm not talking about one party. I'm talking about both parties, any party, right? The way the political systems work now, they're just like, okay, that's what it is now. We got to go argue this thing that it maybe is completely different from what we said a minute ago.
There is nothing more frustrating to me than watching a press secretary holding a press conference and being asked normal questions and responding with the most batshit crazy shit.
Just out there.
Regardless of what party it is, whether it's Karine Jean-Pierre or Sarah Huckabee Sanders, it doesn't fucking matter. They're all insane sociopaths who are professional liars who just like work to propagandize to the American people. It is just so insane to watch them try to dance around obvious issues.
Sean Spicer's the only one who really did any dancing. Dancing with the Stars.
Touche. Good point. My favorite though was Anthony Scaramucci.
The Mooch.
Man, the Mooch is loose. He was the best. 11 glorious days.
Oh God.
Yeah, I love that that's still the measure for how long somebody lasts. How many mooches.
Amazing that your press secretary does not know what the term off the record means. Just incredible shit.
All right, well, that should bring us to a close. I've been your host, Ryan King. With me, as always,
John Garcia. Time for a cowboy movie. Who's in my posse?
And
Michael Dixon. Long live Stalin and John Wayne and John Ford.
nice.
Hey there, movie buffs, TV toughs, and all listeners in between. John here from the Afterthoughts podcast. I just wanted to drop in at the end of this episode and say thanks for listening. If you've got afterthoughts of your own to share, hit us up. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at The Afterpod, or jump into a conversation on our Discord server. You can find info for this and more at theafterpod.transistor.fm. Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode.